Please welcome back to the stage, Lauren Powell, Head of Health Equity at Biogen.
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome back, Dr. Powell, Lauren Powell, and welcome to all of you joining us here to have this conversation with Lauren about effective workplace communications. Lauren, something that's even more fraught, I'd imagine, in any day, but in a post-COVID work environment.
Yeah.
You have had an incredible career, the head of health equity at Biogen. You were previously vice president at Takeda Pharmaceuticals and launched a successful Equitas boutique consultancy firm. I have to imagine, as you were climbing that corporate ladder, you had to navigate some interpersonal communications with folks in a corporate environment. Talk to me about those engagements. How have you experienced them throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, Candace, thank you for having me. Thanks for being the moderator here. It's great to meet you.
Absolutely.
And it's great to be back this afternoon. I was here earlier this morning too as a moderator. But your question about communication is such a good one. This is a great topic to talk about. And I've certainly navigated, the changes in the way I communicate, as well as miscommunication, as well as thinking about all the different ways there are to communicate, right?
Yeah.
There's verbal communication, we have body language, we have texting, we have instant messenger, we have email. So there's so many different modes of communication, and some of them, during COVID took precedent over others. And so there are a lot of ways in which I have navigated communication on lots of different levels.
Talk to me about that. One of the things you said is that you sort of evolved in how you communicate in the workplace. Talk to me about that evolution. What specifically do you think your sort of growth trajectory has been?
Yeah, well, I started off, after I finished my PhD, I started off in government, which is a very different place. I started off, yes, in state government and at that. And so, I learned very early on that people are direct, that sometimes there aren't like niceties involved. Like, I actually really like it when someone starts an email, a call, good morning, a salutation, a greeting, hello. And so that rubbed me the wrong way. And so I didn't want to be like that. So I made sure I always started an email the way I would like to receive it. Right.
I love that.
And I always thought about too, government is very hierarchical, as many of our organizations are, that like titles really matter. Spelling someone's name right really matters, especially if it's like in their signature.
You don't know how many times people get mine wrong though. And I'm like, it's not that hard.
It's written right there for you. You can like literally copy and paste. But I think that, but also government like is really hung up on titles too, right? Like, so if I didn't know someone but I knew their credentials, at least I would always start, good morning, doctor, good morning, commissioner. So that was something that really kind of started off my communication. And then, in government, you also have to be very thoughtful because FOIA requests can happen. And so you want to always be very thorough.
Tell people what that means, because, everybody doesn't know the Freedom of Information Act. So they don't know what it means when you got to be careful what you create a record of.
A paper trail. Yes, you have to be thoughtful. It's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but you want to be thoughtful that like, if this ever comes up in like, a congressional hearing, perhaps you might want to make sure that you said what you said, right? That you were really clear on what you were saying. And so Freedom of Information Act, I learned that very early on. I didn't necessarily make any mistakes, but I just learned that anything I said could be like, subpoenaed, and someone could request it. A journalist could request it. Anyone could request it. And I just wanted to be always mindful of like the tone I was using and the words I was using, and almost trying to like oversimplify what I was saying.
I'm taking a couple nuggets from these things that you've laid out that I really love. And I'm a lawyer by training. I'm covering up my stinky mole. But the nuggets I'm taking away that I love from you is that in written word, it's formal. The salutation, the getting the spelling right, the having some mindfulness about what you create a record was. Take a beat. Remember, it's formal. It's a record. It lasts forever. be formal about that. I also love this nugget that you actually just sort of take a beat and give people their respect. Some people are not going to need it. They'll tell you quickly. I was in state government before, had a title, I'd always be like, you don't have to call me that. Other people will be like, I totally want it. I'm Senator such and such. I want you to, address me as such, but you never assumed, you always ask. And I think that could be really important. And so I love those nuggets for people because it allows them to start in a way that sets them up for success. Can I ask you, so these are great sort of signals of success, but I'll bet there might have been some thorny moments in interpersonal communications. Have you ever had times where even with all the best efforts, it didn't go the way you wanted to?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, absolutely. It has not been rainbows and unicorns at all times. It has not. And you can imagine, I work in health equity. And so part of the root of what I work on is dismantling racism in healthcare and public health. And so even in state government and in corporate America, I have definitely had interactions where I think people were misinterpreting my words and kind of filling in gaps where it wasn't necessary. So I think we have to be very honest about where we are right now in society, in that in communication, quite frankly, right? There are words that are being weaponized.
Yeah.
Very much so. Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
Anything with the word equity in it is certainly being weaponized in communication, as a form of like retaliation in a lot of ways. And so I've certainly had, I can think of an example in state government. So,
I would love that. I was like, give us an example. You don't have to disclose the specifics, the who, but to get concrete for people, give us an example of when it got thorny and then sort of how you pivoted out of that bad part into something constructive.
Yes. So I did my first keynote in Charlottesville, Virginia. So I live in Richmond, Virginia. I should let people know that. Charlottesville, correct. Yes, Charlottesville.
Okay.
And no shade to Charlottesville. It's a beautiful place. UVA is a great campus, but this was 2017, and we know what
fresh
happened.
off. Fresh off. The violence, the international incident that happened when they had that march in Charlottesville. So you were right in the thick of it.
I sure was. About a year-ish later, there was a population health forum that the commissioner was like, they want me to speak, but I think you should do it. And I was like, what? So I got myself together. And if you think about that time, the Black Panther just came out. I decided to do my keynote kind of weaving in like the premise and the storyline of the Black Panther.
Oh, I love that. You were making it contemporary.
I was. And I do this to entertain myself, quite frankly. So I was like, I want to make this interesting and I want to see if this could work. So that's how I formulated my whole keynote. And people like really enjoyed it for the most part. Now there was one, probably several, but only one had the nerve to email me. There was a local health district director. So there are 35 health districts around Virginia, and they all report up to the state. And so I worked for the state. So I sort of had like jurisdiction, if you will, over all these 35 local health districts. There was a local health district director who emailed me and basically said she totally disagreed with my premise on health equity. She totally disagreed with leveraging the Black Panther. And I think, she had some things to say about like the Black Panther Party. I was like, clearly you don't know the movie, but okay, that's fine. So, I listened to her issues, and very important, I sat on them for a minute. I was like, this is really.
You didn't respond in the heat of the moment.
I didn't respond right away. Now I did like draft something, but I said, I feel as though I need to wait because the thing I was going to send might have, ended my career. I don't know. It could have been for you. So I said, let me pause for a minute and let me just reread this and see what she's really saying. And I did craft a response to her. I crafted a response to her. And what I found was that she really wasn't 100% disagreeing with what I was putting out there. It was like a nuanced disagreement.
Yeah.
And when I read it the first time, I was real fired up because of, just a lot of things. I was real fired up.
Yeah.
And after corresponding with her and after sending her a very thoughtfully crafted message that was like, actually, I pulled this evidence from here. Let me link you to it. Actually, I chose this statistic from here. Let me show you why. And I chose to frame it this way because of points 1, 2, and 3. And so
love that.
I responded in a succinct way that actually was like almost void of emotion, because sometimes I think people don't know that they're hitting our buttons sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do,
Yeah.
and we need to.
Yeah.
And that's for discussion. But sometimes people hit buttons that they don't know that they're hitting. And our response is to like, let me write this message to you, right? And that's not always productive. So because I was able to respond to her in that way, I saw her at a conference like a couple months later, and we actually sat down and talked. And I said,
that's what I was going to ask. I was like, do you think that the information you provided her helped her evolve?
I think it helped her evolve some. I think she was looking at it from the perspective of where she was located in the state, and kind of how I was situating some of my arguments about like health equity being essential to like population health and things. Yeah. And from her perspective, she just had a slightly different view.
Yeah.
And I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that. So we were able to sit down and actually talk face to face. And she actually ended up being like a stronger supporter of me than I thought she would be.
I love this, because you know what I love about this? I feel like you are giving an example of what is called work. What I love is that, no, I'm serious. I find this, it's like, and we're in this moment in history where I think it's very true. It's so polarizing.
Yes.
Right? We question with intensity. We don't like being questioned. It's a lot hypersensitivity. But the work part is not just, I'm going to tell you my ideas. It's actually that I'm going to make the case for a thing and do some work to bring you towards me. Like, that's the work. Right? It's not that you have to arrive at my understanding when you start. I'm actually going to, like bring you towards me. And then you were like, and I'm going to listen to you and hear that you might have some perspective about the region of the world that you are working in. And I think that's really an powerful lesson for interpersonal and workplace communication. I also want to just hold up that nugget that you did something that I think folks in work need to do, which is that you wrote a response and then you said, pause. I'm going to sleep on this and I'm going to come back and think about it a little bit and see if I'm as emotional if I just give it a couple hours or give it a night. And I think that's really brilliant. Mm-hmm. I feel like you have already given us so much, and I love the example you give, because it had all those tenets of like how sometimes, especially when it's like race, gender, things that are very personal to you get wrapped up in there. You are in your feelings about a communication. Yeah. You have specific advice for Black corporate professionals about how they can get what they need communicating in the workplace to really be effective.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much here. So one, I think we have to recognize that there are multiple like modalities in how we communicate, right? And like it depends on who you're communicating to. Yeah. So I've recently joined Biogen, in biotech world in the corporate America, and while I have worked in another corporate space in corporate America and another pharma company, this one's different, right? Yeah. So. Yeah. I have different stakeholders. I have a different boss. And so one of the first questions I asked my boss is, how would you like me to communicate with you?
I love that.
Would you like me to text you? Would you like me to email you? What else would you like me to know? And she gave me a couple tips, but then I also went to her admin and I said, hey, can we talk? Like I would love to introduce myself. That. But I also would like to know what's the best way to communicate with my new supervisor. So does she like bullet points? She was like, yes, she likes bullet points. What time of day is best for me to send a message that she'll respond? Well, she checks her messages early in the morning and later in the evening. So if you send something in the middle of the day, it's going to get lost. Thank you for that. So I think it depends, one, know your audience, know who you're communicating to. So very senior executive level people do not have time to read Aaliyah's 4-page letter. I love Aaliyah, but you cannot, please don't write me a 4-page letter. Like,
I love that song. I love that you use that. You are absolutely right. Because I hate nothing but my team knows. I'm like, please don't send me a long email, y'all.
Please don't. And if you're going to, like, bold or underline or italicize what you want me to pull out of it, if that's what you have to do. But, you know, don't, just try not to do it. Yeah. So I think it depends. Know your audience, number one, is what I would say. Number two, you know, share what's necessary. So sometimes we end up giving, you know, so much background information that isn't necessary, right? Give them exactly what they need to know. And then I would say, third is like, be crisp and concise. Like, the best way to say this is like, sometimes I try to approach writing emails. I don't want to come across cold. Like, I think you can still have personality. And I always open my emails, for example, with like, hi, good morning. I hope your day is going well. I hope your week is progressing well. Even if I'm sending an instant message to someone, hey, good morning. Hope your morning has started off well, or hope you had a great holiday weekend, whatever. So I think humanizing a message is also very important, because we're not like chat bots. So we want to know that we're talking with, you know, a person, corresponding with a person. But I also just try to get kind of straight to the facts. Like, I don't want to say like be void of emotion, but like, it's almost like writing like a policy brief, or like writing, you know, as an attorney, maybe. Like,
I love that. You know what I always say is hit the headline.
Yes. Right? Don't bury the lead. Yes.
Don't bury the lead. Hit the headline. I love this because you've given such like clear tactical nuggets. Like, hit the headline, be succinct, get there, right? If there's detail underneath, great, but you want to get to that sort of like, what's the big takeaway right up top? I also love that there's a clear nugget about intentionality. If you have a specific audience, a specific stakeholder group, that could be colleagues that work and think a type of way because you work maybe with some engineers or some scientists or some lawyers. Actually, those different types of professionals probably operate and communicate in different ways. So be clear, like you were with your supervisor, about what works best for you. Communicate about the appropriate style of communication. And I just think so important. Again, you bring this thread through of like, you can be succinct and still like kind and thoughtful and humanizing at the same time. You can engage with people like they're people. And I bet you're going to win a lot of friends doing that. Can I ask you, and I think you started to sort of like pivot here. I love that you went to your supervisor and you were sort of like, what works for you? You're questioning. Folks can sort of struggle with this. How do you really recommend that Black professionals in particular work on giving and receiving feedback?
Yeah, this is a challenge, I think, on both sides. I think, first of all, you know, feedback is required for our jobs. Like, we all have performance reviews, you know, but we also should want feedback just to grow professionally. And as individual people, like, I want to know what the people around me have to say about me, because they need to hold up a mirror to me sometimes and say, no, girl, like, you were actually in the wrong for that. So
your slip is hanging. Do you remember that?
Yeah, like, your slip is showing. So we should welcome feedback, right? Now, I also say that with a caveat, because sometimes people can be purposely negative and vicious with feedback, right? So I think you, much like knowing who you're writing an email to or communicating with, you also have to know who is giving you feedback, right? And consider the source as well. But I think, you know, I found that like asking for feedback kind of consistently lowers the bar of like anxiety and like waiting for like an annual performance review. So I'm constantly asking, how am I doing? You know, do you have any feedback for me? Are there any other areas I should be maybe working to grow in? And that takes a maturity, right? Because they could say something very serious. They could say something that you think you're like killing the game with, and they're like, actually, you really
Work
need to
on it.
yeah, exactly. And so it takes a level of maturity and wherewithal to really ask for feedback and apply it.
Yeah.
So don't ask for something and someone actually shares it with you and then you don't do anything with it.
Exactly.
That's not a good look, especially if it's a supervisor. And then I was thinking giving feedback, people talk about like the sandwich method where you like start with something disarming, you like put the bad feedback in the middle and then you end with something positive. I guess you could do that. I just believe in like being transparent, but I think in transparency doesn't mean you have to be mean. It doesn't mean you have to be like rude and condescending. I think you can speak plainly without necessarily like tearing people down.
Yeah.
The harder question that I think to navigate is like, how do you coach up, if that makes sense? Like, is there space for us to coach up? And I think, again, it depends on who you are working with, right?
Lauren, I love this. What I love about both of those, on one hand, you're saying solicit feedback. Don't wait for it to come to you. Don't make it like a big surprise at Christmas where you open this, shiny box, but solicit it along the way. One of the things that I feel like you're doing, that you're articulating, you're building a relationship, which is so much of what communication can facilitate. If you take the stakes out of getting feedback, you're both sort of creating an environment where this person, your supervisor or colleague, feels like they can come to you and just sort of like keep it a buck, which frankly endears you to somebody that you work for. They're like, I don't have to candy coat. I can go to her. I can tell her what's working, what's not. She'll pivot with me. She's responsive based on your guidance when I'm giving it to her. You can actually sort of like break down some barriers and work really well on giving feedback. What I always say, and it's like, give feedback. I think it's helpful also to be direct. But what you're saying on coaching up is that I feel like either with a supervisor or when you're supervising someone and giving feedback, one of the ways to make feedback not feel so negative is to be a problem solver around it. Sometimes we take feedback as like a personal critique, right? It's like, you could have tried, but it's like sometimes the feedback is really like, here's something that I'm not sure is working. Can we try this? Which is what I liked about the way you treated the communication question with your supervisor in the first instance. But I wonder also concretely when giving feedback, if by approaching it as a problem solver, or you don't just come with a critique, you actually come with some recommendations, immediately makes you sort of a part of trying to help solve the problem. And again, it's relationship building, it's endearing. In work, we're all working and trying to do it together. So you want to come to the table immediately in a way that's constructive.
If I can just add to that, that is so spot on. And one of the ways I've done that in a very strategic way is like, quick check-in calls with my supervisor, with, team members, whatever. I never have a meeting without an agenda at this point, even if it's just, 4 very high level, topics, like, because that helps me focus on what we're going to talk about. That helps them see what we're going to talk about. And then I can take a moment to say, like, I just want to align on everything we talked about here. And these are my takeaways. Are these your takeaways as well?
Ooh, you are reflecting.
Yes. Like which one of these should I prioritize, right? Before our next meeting. So some of this has to also be self-directed. And so I introduced a framework for meeting and for check-ins with folks.
Yeah. I love that. You're also just keeping everybody organized. You have a framework for the meeting. You're reflecting at the end, which makes sure that, I heard this. Did you hear this? Which sort of closes it, getting everybody on the same page. And those are very constructive tools. You started answering this question in a way that I think is really important for this conversation, which is that there's sometimes where it is laced with bias, right? We are talking to an audience of Black professional.
Yes.
And what do you do? What do you recommend for those professionals when that sort of feedback feels sort of tinged with some racial bias? Like, how do you think the effective professional really sort of cuts through that misunderstanding to sort of get back to good?
Mm-hmm. A great question. And absolutely, we are talking to an audience that is significantly comprised of Black women. It is not lost on me that misogyny and racism and sexism, the intersection of that and what we have to navigate in the workforce is very different than what anyone else has to. And to that end, we do receive feedback that sometimes is steeped in both of those systems of oppression. So one is it matters how you're receiving that feedback. If you're receiving that feedback verbally, I would listen.
Yeah.
Then I would ask some very pointed questions.
Yeah.
Could you point to an example as to how I am actually, doing X, Y, and Z? Could you tell me how you see that impacting the business, or how is that impacting the work? When did you notice X, Y, and Z? Oh, that seems like that was a few months ago. Is there a reason why I'm just now receiving the feedback about that? Yeah. So I would ask several questions that I would perceive to be almost investigative and disarming. But then I would also, after that conversation, this is what I have learned from government, and I will never forget it. I would send an email to my leader and say, I just want to summarize our conversation. I want to summarize my understanding of our conversation to my, and summarize, like, no emotion, just summarize. It's documentation, right? It's just documenting, this is what I heard. And I say that because sometimes we get in positions where it's he said, she said, right? It's just words again, words going back and forth, and there's nothing written in paper. And you're an attorney, so if it's not written down somewhere, it may or may not have happened. And so I think the documentation is really important. And I think that it's not, I think what I have learned is that it's not always my job to change someone's mind.
Yeah.
It's not always.
You're not fixing racism on Wednesday afternoon.
That's not my ministry. No, that's not my job to do that. So in some instances, your opinion is going to be your opinion, right? And I understand that has very significant impacts on potential career growth, on the potential for longevity in a workplace. But I also think that's the importance of having multiple relationships, which also speaks to like the keys of communication, having multiple relationships with lots of different folks around the organization who could maybe vouch for you in a different way.
Oh, I love that. Diversifying the stakeholders that you're communicating with. So you have different audiences and different choirs to stay with the ministry frame. Okay. I want to ask you this question. I just want to remind folks who are joining us here for this incredible conversation with Dr. Lauren Powell. I'm going to turn to you in a little bit to take questions. So drop those in the chat. We'll curate a few at the end of this conversation so that you guys can get her incredible advice. Lauren, what advice would you give to these Black corporate professionals about using questions? I feel like you've given so many nuggets about how they use questions. I love the investigative questions to create a record. You were just giving us an example of questions you were talking about earlier to get a feel for somebody's communication type, how they should use questions really to support action and effective communication in the workplace. What other ways can they be questioning to sort of help catapult their trajectory?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Questions are like the best kept secret, for real. I use questions all the time. Like when I am in support of something, when I'm skeptical of something, when I really don't like something, I use questions all the time. So in a way, some people might not really know when I'm like objecting because I'm always asking questions.
I love that.
So I think, when it comes to conversation, especially if you're conversing with someone who has a very, very different mindset or opinion than yours, questions are how you get to better understand where they are coming from. There's an actual like principle that hostage negotiators use. So I took like negotiation classes when I was
getting to
Yes, exactly. Getting to yes. So there are like very strategic steps that people take. And one of them is called tactical empathy.
Yeah.
So it is like strategically kind of like placing questions and placing reactions to let the person that you're negotiating with know that like you can
Disarm.
like yeah like to make them disarm so they feel like you see them and you understand where they're coming from even if you don't agree with their stance. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. That's really hard to do because if I'm talking to a white nationalist, I'm gonna just be real. If I'm talking to a white nationalist who's like, I don't believe you should even exist, like that's gonna be hard for me to
reaction.
Say, use tactical empathy right here, right? So, but then my question is, why do you think that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me what led you to believe that.
Yeah.
And then you start to they have to answer because what's funny is that all of us are only prepared to defend.
Right.
We're usually prepared to defend our stance. And so when we're in conversation with someone who has a different worldview than us, we're prepared to like come back to whatever they have to say.
Right.
So if I hit you with something that's not retaliatory, you're kind of like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, let me think about how to answer that.
I love that. Do you know I love that? We can sometimes forget too that questions are the tool, they're the basic, like most important tool of learning.
Yes.
Right. If you are in a job, questions help you learn, right? I want to understand how you communicate. That's learning. I want to understand what this different vertical does and how it relates to our division. That's learning. I want to understand what our stakeholders are and how we need to communicate with them to make our business successful. That's learning. And all those things offer you some reverence for the place that you're working and signal to everybody else that you care to learn. You care to learn about the piece that you hold. You care to learn about the whole in a way that complements the piece that you're holding. And used strategically, it can help your knowledge base grow in a way that really complements work. Like some of its basic functions are not to be missed. Okay, I'm going to get into these questions, Lauren, because we got a lot for you. Okay, can I take the first question? I love it. Says, how do you get valid feedback to grow or work on when every time your manager is saying you're doing fine? So you're soliciting feedback, but you're getting this kind of like little milquetoast situation where it's like not a whole lot of actual feedback in the feedback. How do you tackle that? How do you get something that you can actually work with?
That's really good. Okay, so let's remember managers are people. Some people are not good at giving feedback. Some people are non-confrontational, or they're totally checked out, or for whatever, they're overwhelmed, right? So some people are not good at that. What I have found is if you structure how they will give you feedback, it's helpful. So there are plenty of ways that you can do. You can, I think, like prompt your own like 360 analysis or something. You know, you can prompt those types of things. You can Google stuff and find worksheets on like, hi, would you mind like filling this out, you know, for over the next week? And like, I would love to talk about this during our one-on-one. So I think creating some structure for folks to give you feedback if they are sort of just not catching a clue is a really, really good like strategic way to be like, I'm really engaged here and I would really love it. Or I'm doing an internal, you know, working group or something with HR and they're wanting some feedback on how my performance is. So
can you help me? I love that. I will just say to this person, they should use some of these nuggets you gave earlier about investigative questioning. Sometimes a general question gets a general response. If you're a fast, busy person, how am I doing? Fine. So, you know, getting specific in that questioning may help get feedback. I just gave you a specific project. How was the writing on that project? How was the timeliness on that project? Did it have all the research? Maybe getting more specific in those questions may get you some more, you know, I did a presentation. Did it feel like I was speaking to the right audience? How about the timing of that? How about the pull together the presentation materials? Perhaps also using some of that investigative questioning you were noting earlier can get you some of that specificity around real projects in real time.
And some of those questions too, to your point about questions, it's also about asking the right question, because you could also ask your manager, I would love to know, like, I want to better understand mechanisms for feedback. So how have you received feedback during your career? You might find out that they haven't. So maybe they don't know how to give you feedback, right? So I think questions are good because we can get more learning, but we can also get more information about the person we're talking to, which might also help us be able to find some common ground.
I love that. Okay, I got a juicy one for you here. This one is, any tips to work through miscommunications in a new working relationship where there are poor first impressions that could set the tone negatively moving forward?
Yeah, first impressions are really everything. They are. However, they don't have to be the end all be all.
Yeah.
So my question would kind of be like, well, what's the situation that led to this? And first and foremost, like, have you apologized for it, or have you acknowledged, the miscommunication? How have you responded to the miscommunication is kind of my first question about that. But I always think, people, especially if you're new, they really want to give you the benefit of the doubt. I believe.
Yeah.
I would like to believe that. And so it takes a bit of humility and self-awareness, emotional intelligence to also read the room and know when you have potentially offended someone, stepped on someone's toes, or maybe said something a little too soon. And I think people make mistakes. So if you have the wherewithal to apologize, or to call out the fact that I may have, mistakenly stepped into some muddy territory that I did not intend to offend anyone. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you. And there's so much I want to bring to the organization, and to, help make you shine as a leader, whatever the phrasing is. But I think it takes some humility and stepping back and recognizing you're new to this environment. And the most important thing to do when you are new is to say nothing and to observe.
Learn. So I love that. I think your advice, one, we don't know. It could have been a little doo-doo boo-boo on both sides, but I think you got to be direct. If it's awkward, it's probably awkward for both of you already, and you probably can diffuse a lot of that by getting right to it, as Lauren has advised you. I'm going to jump because they're coming in and we don't have a lot of time left. Lauren, the question is, where can we learn more about getting to yes, approach to negotiation, tactical empathy?
I think that's a book. Getting to Yes is an actual book. So, yes. Sorry, we weren't like making it up, but it's a book. So you can definitely find that. You can Google that and find that. But there are tons of negotiation courses. When I was at Harvard, it's required that we take negotiation courses.
It was required in law school.
Yes. So it's required. And I actually think here's the thing though, all Black women already know how to negotiate, because we have had to negotiate our presence and existence in this society from the beginning of time. So we know how to negotiate,
to be in tune with other people's feelings.
Absolutely. We are socialized to that. The bigger question to me is, how do we apply this to different settings? So business settings are a different setting. So Getting to Yes is a book, but I would also highly suggest like looking into some of the virtual certificate courses and things that focus on negotiation specifically in business. Yeah, because that could help a lot.
I agree. It's a really wonderful discourse, and you can get the books, do a course, some management course, and I bet it would be really beneficial. The next question is, virtual meetings have become the norm, and we're on camera now more than ever, as you and I both sit here. How do you address being judged or negatively perceived for your facial expressions, hand motions, or lack of smiles when communicating? I'm wondering what these hand motions are. Or lack of smiles when communicating?
Oh, this is a good question. And it's a hard one.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, what I'm about to say, I think is unfair sometimes when we are on virtual platforms. I found that I have to be over expressionative on virtual platforms, because like, and I've talked about this with other coworkers of like lots of different races and levels within organizations. Like, it's just so hard to actually read people's emotions from a screen. Like, I had a conversation with someone once who said that they were having a meeting with a colleague, and like the person on the other side was crying, but they couldn't see it. They couldn't actually see it like via camera. Right. And so, and I don't think they're like, you know, chastising them or anything, but that just goes to show to me that like
the distance,
there's such a distance. Right.
Yeah.
So, while I don't believe in like, you know, having to put on like pomp and circumstance to be on camera, I do think it requires an additional level of energy and presence, which is also why it's extremely exhausting. To be in virtual meetings.
Yeah.
And I don't think that microaggressions go away just because we are in virtual settings. I think they show up in different ways, which is unfair. It continues to be unfair. But I also think there are ways to sort of push back a little bit on that. Like, you know, again, this is where questions come into play. You know, what are the expectations for virtual meetings? Is it expected that our camera always be on? If we need to step out, would you like us to drop, you know, a message in the chat? You know, some of us are more expressionative than others. Are there any thoughts on that? You know, so questions. Questions. What can you say to a question? Like,
use that strategic questioning. I love this. I love this. Okay. Do you have any advice on how to communicate interest in exploring opportunities outside of my current job function without seeming ungrateful for my current role? I love this question.
Oh, very, very good
question. Stretch.
Yeah, this is really good. So this is where communication is really important, right? Because it's not only about maintaining your relationship with where you are, but expressing interest in maybe getting to know a leader in a different function or area, and further wanting to know more about their business. So I would first request maybe an informational interview if that's appropriate with your level and where you are. Or sometimes you can express to your manager like, hey, I'm just really interested in like learning more about like commercial. I was on this call and like they said some things that I never really heard before, and I just would love to know more. Like, is there anyone you suggest I speak with? Because then you're not doing something sort of behind their back if you feel that's an issue. Or if that's not really an issue, then I would request maybe an informational interview. And there is where, again, you're asking this leader questions, or you're asking someone working in another function questions. Like, tell me about what you do. Like, you know, what kind of skills have you had to like, you know, really hone in on to be successful in this role? How hard do you think it would be for someone from this area to transfer to an area over here? What additional skills would I need to master? What additional training would I need? Where do you see yourself going after you are finished, you know, I don't know, making an impact here? So I don't think that's being ungrateful. That's being inquisitive, and that's being interested in the business. Yeah. And if you frame it that way, I don't know a manager who would, you know, object.
I think that you hit it spot on. I think it's both being inquisitive about the business, and I think there's real power in framing it for yourself, not letting it be a surprise to people. Very early in my career, I went to a very senior leader that I was working for who still mentors me today and said, I'm going to explore some other opportunities. I'm not ready to quit. I love my job, but I'm at a point in my career where I just need to be thinking about trajectory and looking around. Both, they were supportive of that exploration and frankly were like, let me just make sure you're clear on what the opportunity and the road forward is here if you stay. So sometimes in communicating transparently, you actually get something you weren't even looking for. Lauren, this has been an incredible conversation. I could sit with you for hours and hours. I'm just so grateful that ELC gave me an opportunity to sit with you and spend some time this afternoon. And I know people are going to take away some really really beautiful concrete nuggets that they can apply in their work from what you've given him. I want to give it each and every one of them. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I know you join me in thanking Dr. Powell for her incredible wisdom. And I want to thank the entire ELC team and our sponsors, Charles Schwab and Novartis, for hosting and helping us make this information available to each and every one of you. Enjoy the conference, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
Thank you so much.